He almost turned his horse around when he saw the rifle by her door. The woman on the porch did not wave. She did not smile. She stood stiff in the last of the light, one hand on her shawl, the other close to the gun, like she had learned the hard way that kindness could get a person killed. Behind him, his little girl shivered against his back and whispered that she was cold. He felt her small fingers bunch in his coat. The woman's eyes dropped to the child. Something changed in her face then, soft and quick as a candle catching flame. But would it last long enough to let them stay? 6 months had passed since Alina Hart had buried her husband behind the barn. 6 months of broken fences, spooked cattle, and long nights with only the wind for company. Her ranch sat deep in the Wyoming territory, miles from the nearest town, tucked beneath dark ridges that looked black at sundown. Neighbors had come often at first. They brought pies, condolences, and awkward silence. Then summer ended, and so did most of their concern. A widow alone was a sad thing. A widow trying to hold a ranch alone was a foolish one. At 32, Alina still looked young from a distance. Up close, the frontier told the truth. There were pale lines at the corners of her gray-green eyes now. Her brown hair stayed pinned tight from morning to night. Her hands were rough, her shoulders sore, and every room in the cabin reminded her of someone missing. So when she saw 2 riders coming slow through the falling dark, she reached for the Winchester by instinct. The man stopped at the gate and swung down from the saddle with care. He was tall, lean, and worn by the road. His coat had been mended more than once. His boots were tired. But the child behind him struck Alina harder than the sight of the man ever could. A little girl, maybe 8, thin as winter grass. "Ma'am," the man called. "Sorry to trouble you so late. Name, S. Silas Boone. Storekeeper in town said you might be needing a hand." Alina kept her face still. Did he now? He said the widow Hart needed help, but was too stubborn to ask for it. That sounded exactly like Ben Cooper at the Mercantile. Meddling old fool. Alina let out a breath through her nose. "And you just happened to be passing through." Silas removed his hat. Dark hair, tired eyes, honest ones maybe. "Truth is, my daughter and I been on the trail near 3 weeks. We need a place to winter. I can work cattle, mend fence, repair a roof, and keep my mouth shut when needed. I don't drink. I don't gamble. I'll give you fair labor for fair pay." Then the child slid down from the horse. She landed a little unsteady, clutching a rag doll to her chest. Dust covered her dress. Her braid had half come loose. She looked at Alina with wide, watchful eyes, then tipped her face up to her father. "Papa," she whispered, "I'm cold." That did it. Alina looked at the child, then at the man, then at the barn and the fading light. She knew weary eyes when she saw them. She had been waking up with her own every morning since Daniel died. "What's her name?" she asked. "Rosie," Silas said. "Rosalind Boone." Alina nodded once. "Put your horses in the barn, there's hay enough. Then come inside. I made stew and there's more than I need." Relief moved through his face so fast he could not hide it. "Much obliged, ma'am." She turned before he could thank her again. If he stayed thankful too long, she might lose her nerve. Inside, she fed the fire and lifted 3 bowls from the shelf instead of 1. The motion felt strange, rusted, like opening a room in herself she had nailed shut. She cut bread, stirred the pot, and set 3 spoons beside the bowls. Through the window she saw the barn lantern flare. The man worked carefully. That mattered. For one sharp moment she remembered Daniel at her father's door 10 years before, hat in his hand, asking for work with that same plain dignity. She had watched him from the stairs then. Now she stood on the other side of such a moment, older and lonelier than she ever thought she'd be. When the knock came, she opened the door to cleaner faces. Silas had washed at the pump. Rosie's hair had been redone in a quick, uneven braid. Her dress was still worn but tidy. Alina stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "Warm yourselves." Rosie stopped just inside the doorway and stared around the cabin. The quilts, the bookshelf, the lamp on the side table, all of it. "It's pretty," she whispered, then looked afraid she had spoken out of turn. Alina surprised herself by smiling. "Thank you. Would you help me set the table?" Rosie nodded at once and set her doll gently on a chair before following her to the cupboard. Her small hands trembled when she carried the bowls, careful as if they were made of gold. They ate by firelight. Silas did not rush, but Alina could tell he knew hunger. Rosie fought sleep between bites. How long since her mother? Alina asked quietly. Silas stared down into his bowl. 4 months, fever. The words settled heavy in the room. We had a place in Colorado, after she passed. He stopped and swallowed. Sometimes the walls of a place remember too much. Alina knew that truth. Lord, she knew it. And folks don't want to hire a man with a child beside him, he went on. No, Alina said softly, most don't. Rosie's head drooped lower. Without thinking, Alina reached out and smoothed the girl's hair. Rosie leaned into the touch before she even knew she was doing it. There's a small room off the kitchen, Alina said. Enough space for 2 pallets. $30 a month, board included. 2 weeks to prove yourself. Silas looked up fast. You mean it? I mean I need help, she said. And Winter doesn't care much about pride. He held out his hand. She took it across the table. His palm was rough and warm. You have my word, he said. Rosie had fallen asleep on her folded arms, cheek pressed against the rag doll. Alina rose and lifted her gently. The child was shockingly light, too light. Small arms came around Alina's neck in her sleep, trusting her without question. Something inside Alina broke open then. Quietly, deep. She laid Rosie in the little room beneath an old quilt and stood there for a moment, watching her breathe. Then she went back to the fire. Silas was standing by the hearth, hat in hand. I'm grateful, Mrs. Hart. Alina, she said, save your gratitude. Morning comes early here. A sad, tired smile touched his mouth. Yes, ma'am, Alina. Later, after he disappeared into the small room and the cabin turned still, Alina stood by the window and looked out over the dark yard, the corral, the barn, the land she had nearly stopped believing she could keep. Tonight, for the first time in many months, the house did not feel empty. Somewhere under her roof, a child slept warm, and a man who had lost what she had lost kept watch in the next room. It was not peace. Not yet. But it felt enough like the start of something that Alina stayed at the window a little longer, listening to the night and wondering what morning might ask of her now. The smell of coffee pulled Silas from sleep before dawn. For one slow second he forgot where he was. Then he heard Rosie breathing beside him and remembered the warm room, the stew, the widow with steady eyes and a rifle by the door. He dressed quietly and stepped into the main room. Alina was already at the stove. Her sleeves were rolled. Her hair was pinned back tight. The fire painted gold along one side of her face. She did not turn right away, but she knew he was there. Coffee's ready, she said. Breakfast in a minute. Silas poured a cup and let the heat sink into his hands. Real coffee, not weak trail mud. Real coffee. He had nearly forgotten the comfort of it. I can start outside before we eat, he said. You can eat first, Alina replied. No good hand ever worked better on an empty stomach. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. Alina. Yes, Alina. That earned him the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Rosie came shuffling in soon after, dragging her doll by one arm. Her hair stuck out in sleep-soft wisps. She saw Silas and hurried into him, pressing her face to his side. Morning, sunshine, he murmured. She peeked toward Alina with shy eyes. Good morning, Rosie, Alina said gently. Would you like milk with breakfast? Rosie blinked. Real milk. Fresh from the pail. Rosie looked up at her father, as if such a thing might be too much to ask. At his nod, she whispered, Yes, please. They sat to a breakfast of biscuits, eggs, and bacon. Rosie ate fast at first, then slowed when she saw nobody was taking her plate away. Even so, she slipped half a biscuit into the pocket of her dress. Alina noticed. There's more, she said quietly. Rosie froze. In this house, you eat till you're full. You don't have to hide food. Rosie's cheeks turned pink. She nodded, then took the biscuit back out and finished it in careful bites. After breakfast, Silas reached for his coat. Rosie reached for his hand. Where are you going, Papa? Outside. Need to help with the ranch. Her grip tightened. The road had taught her that people vanished. He could feel that fear in her little fingers. Before he could answer, Alina set down a basket. "The hens need checking. Think you could help me gather eggs while your papa sees to the horses?" Rosie looked torn. Staying close to him mattered, but so did eggs, apparently. "I could help," she said. "You could," Alina agreed. Silas watched them go toward the henhouse, Rosie's small boots hurrying to keep pace. Something in his chest eased. In daylight the ranch looked honest and tired. The land rolled wide under a pale Wyoming sky. The buildings were sound, but only just. Fence posts leaned. One gate dragged. A section of corral looked one hard storm from giving up entirely. This place had been fighting for breath. He started with the worst of the fence. The work came back to him like an old prayer: measure, cut, set, hammer, test. He lost himself in the rhythm. Now and then he heard Rosie's voice somewhere near the house, thin and bright. Once he heard Alina laugh. It was brief and surprised, as if the sound had escaped without her permission. Near noon they met at the pump. Rosie held up her apron like treasure. "I found 11 eggs, and Mrs. Alina showed me the gray barn cat and her babies." Silas rubbed the top of her head. "That sounds like a busy morning." "There are 4 kittens," Rosie said with grave importance. "One of them sneezed on me." Alina filled a tin cup and handed it to him. She worked hard. "Did you now?" Rosie stood taller. "Yes, sir." Lunch was bread, cold beef, and preserves. Alina spread a hand-drawn map beside her plate and showed him the grazing ground, the stream, the winter pasture, and the north fence line where trouble liked to start. "Daniel knew every inch of this land," she said, then went quiet. Silas nodded. "Looks to me like he chose well." Her eyes flicked to him. She seemed to weigh the words, then gave a small nod of thanks. After the meal, Rosie curled up near the hearth with one of the kittens asleep in her lap. The doll lay forgotten on the rug. She looked softer already, less frightened. Silas caught Alina watching her. "She remembers her mother?" Alina asked. "Some days clear as church bells, some days only in pieces." He glanced at the doll. "Her mother made that for her 4th birthday. Rosie talks to it sometimes when she misses her." Alina's face changed. Not pity, something deeper. "Children need a place to put their sorrow," she said. "Yes," he answered, "they do." He worked through the afternoon, fixing what he could. The chicken coop door, a loose harness peg, rot starting in the loft boards. By sundown his shoulders ached and his hands were blistered again in all the right places. Supper felt different than the night before. Warmer. Rosie had found her voice now. She talked about the kittens and the hens and how the barn smelled better than one of the boarding houses they had stayed in. Alina asked questions and listened like each answer mattered. Then Rosie asked, "Do you know any stories?" Alina leaned back in her chair. "Not many about princesses." "That's all right. My grandmother once chased a bear from her kitchen with a rolling pin." Rosie's mouth fell open. "A real bear. A big greedy one, came sniffing after her pies." Rosie laughed so suddenly she startled herself. Silas sat still and watched the sound land in the room. He had not heard his daughter laugh like that in months. Alina told the story plain and slow, letting the silly parts breathe. Rosie leaned on every word. By the time the tale ended, the child was yawning hard enough to wobble. Silas lifted her from the chair. "Will you tell another one tomorrow?" Rosie asked, half asleep on his shoulder. "If there's time," Alina said. "There should be," Rosie murmured. After he settled her in bed, Silas came back to find Alina scraping plates into the slop bucket. "I'll help." "You worked all day." "So did you." For a moment neither moved. Then she handed him a dish towel. They worked side by side in easy quiet. The fire popped. Wind pressed once at the walls. Beyond the window, the yard lay silver beneath the rising moon. When the last plate was dried, Alina rested both palms on the table. "It was good," she said. "What was?" "Hearing laughter in this house again." Silas looked at her, really looked. She was tired, grieving still, guarded down to the bone, but there was a softness at the edges now, something waking after a long, cold season. It was good for us too, he said. She held his gaze a moment, then looked away first. Tomorrow comes early, she murmured. He nodded. It always does. But when he lay down that night beside his sleeping daughter, the house sounded different. Not healed. Not safe from the world. Not yet. Still, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like room being made. By the end of the first week, the ranch no longer felt like a place holding its breath. It still carried sorrow. Silas could feel that in the quiet corners, in the empty side of the bed Alina never mentioned, in the way her eyes sometimes went distant when the fire burned low. But life had begun moving through the house again. Small life, steady life. The kind that asked for breakfast, boots, eggs, stories, and one more log on the fire. Rosie changed first. She followed Alina from room to room like a little shadow, eager to help with anything, sweeping, shelling beans, folding cloths that came out crooked no matter how hard she tried. Alina never hurried her, never laughed when her stitches went wide or her biscuits came out too flat. "Smaller," Alina said one evening, guiding Rosie's hand as she worked a needle through a torn apron. "Tiny stitches, that's what keeps things strong." Rosie stuck out her tongue in concentration. "Like this." "Just like that." Silas sat across the room oiling a bridle, though he had already oiled it once. He kept his head down and listened to their voices. Martha had wanted to teach Rosie those things. She had planned on years of it. He had thought there would be time. His throat tightened. The next morning brought harder work. The cattle still grazed high in the summer pasture and the nights were turning sharp. If they did not bring the herd down soon, the weather might do it for them. Alina studied the hills from horseback while Silas looked over the spread. "It's too much for 2 people in one day," she said. Silas shifted in the saddle. "Rosie can ride." Alina turned to him. "She's a child. She's been riding since she could hold on. I won't put her in danger, but she can help keep pressure where we need it. Truth is, she needs to feel useful." Alina looked toward the barn, where Rosie was brushing her little mare with fierce attention. After a long breath, Alina said, "If we do this, she listens to every word." "She will." When they told Rosie, her whole face lit up. "Real ranch work." "Real work means real listening," Silas said. "Yes, sir." Alina found an old youth saddle in the tack room. It fit Rosie well enough. When the 3 of them rode out beneath the pale morning sky, something settled inside Silas. The creak of leather, the movement of cattle ahead, the land opening wide on every side. This was work he understood. The herd was scattered across a high meadow. They moved slow at first. No shouting, no panic, just quiet pressure from 3 riders working a line. Alina took the right side, Silas the left. Rosie stayed near the middle, watching for any cow that thought about breaking free. "Steady," Silas called. Rosie lifted a hand to show she heard him. She did well, better than well. She saw trouble before it started. Once, a red heifer peeled away toward a stand of scrub. Rosie moved in calm and neat, turning the animal with a confidence that made Alina glance across the herd in surprise. "She's got a gift," Alina said when they stopped to water the horses. Silas felt pride warm his tired chest. Her mother did too. They worked all day, bringing down one bunch after another toward the lower pasture. By late afternoon, Rosie sat a little heavier in the saddle, but she never once complained. When they finally unsaddled, she swayed on her feet. Silas reached to steady her, but Alina stepped in first with a tin cup of water. "You earned this," she said. Rosie drank like she had crossed a desert. Then Alina held out a silver dollar. Rosie just stared. "For your work," Alina said, "fair wages." "My own." "Your own." Rosie took the coin with both hands as if it might vanish. "I'm rich." Silas laughed before he could stop himself. Alina did too. That night Rosie kept the silver dollar tucked in her palm clear through supper. She laid it beside her spoon while she ate. Then she tucked it into her dress, then took it back out again just to make sure it was real. "What will you do with it?" Alina asked. "Save it," Rosie said at once. "Papa says saving matters." "It does," Alina agreed. "But sometimes it's all right to buy one good thing for yourself." Rosie considered that as if it were serious philosophy. After she fell asleep, exhausted and smiling, Sela stepped out onto the porch and found Alina there with her shawl around her shoulders. The night was clear and cold. Stars hung low above the dark ridges. "You didn't have to pay her," he said. "Yes, I did." He leaned on the rail beside her. "Most folks would have called it helping." "She worked," Alina said. "Girls ought to know their work has worth. Too many grow up thinking they should only be grateful for what gets handed to them." Sela studied her profile in the moonlight. "Daniel teach you that?" A soft smile touched her face. "Among other things, my father taught me to read. Daniel taught me numbers, contracts, feed costs, breeding notes. Said if I lived on a ranch, I should know the ranch, not just the kitchen." "That sounds like a good man." "The best." Her voice came out low and fierce, then it softened. "He would have liked Rosie." They stood in silence after that, listening to the distant shifting of cattle and the soft knock of a loose shutter against the wall. Through the window, Sela's could see Rosie asleep on the trundle, one hand still near the pocket with her silver dollar. The next few days fell into a rhythm: work in the morning, repairs through noon, supper by lamplight, Rosie learning small things from Alina and larger ones from the land itself: how to knead dough, how to gather kindling before dusk, how to look at clouds and know whether trouble was coming. One afternoon Sela's came in from the barn and found flour all over the kitchen. Rosie had it in her hair. Alina had it on her cheek. The table was white with it. "We're making bread," Rosie announced. "I can see that," Sela said. "Looks more like a fight." "Bread is a fight," Alina replied with straight-faced dignity. "Sometimes the dough wins." Rosie giggled. Silas washed his hands and joined them. The kitchen was warm. The dough was soft under his palms. Rosie leaned against Alina without thinking, and Alina did not move away. For one long moment Silas forgot the road, the hunger, the months of running. There was only this: warm bread in the oven, a child laughing, a woman beside him who looked less lonely every day. That night, after Rosie had been tucked in, Alina sat by the fire adding cloth to the hem of one of Rosie's dresses. "She's growing," she said. Silas watched her needle move in and out through the fabric, even through hard times. Alina looked up then, and whatever had been quiet between them all week seemed to rise into the room. "We take each day as it comes," she said softly. Silas nodded. It was the only safe answer. But when he stepped outside to bring in more firewood, he knew the truth already. This place was beginning to feel dangerous in a new way, not because of the winter, because he was starting to hope. The morning trouble came. Frost still clung to the grass. Silas was in the barn with a curry brush in one hand and a bucket in the other when Alina called his name. Something in her voice made him set both things down at once. He stepped into the yard and saw them. 3 riders. They came slow on purpose, letting the horses pick their way across the frozen ground as if they had all the time in the world. The man in front sat heavy in the saddle. His face was broad, pale-eyed, and cut by a scar that pulled one corner of his mouth tight. The 2 men behind him looked mean in the careless way of men who enjoyed being feared. Silas felt his body go still. "Rosie," he said without looking back. "Inside." "But Papa, I was just—" "Now." She heard enough in his voice to obey. She ran past Alina and into the house, doll bouncing against her skirt. The riders stopped at the gate. "Mrs. Hart," the scarred man called, tipping his hat with a kind of mock respect. "Name S. Wade Cutter. I ride for Cyrus Talbot." Alina's jaw tightened. "I know exactly who you ride for." "Then that saves time." He glanced at Silas. "So you hired yourself a hand." "My ranch is my concern," Alina said. "Everything out here is Mr. Talbot's concern if it touches his water or his grass." Silas moved one step closer to her. "State your business." Cutter looked at him more directly then, measuring. "Stray cattle crossed onto Talbot land yesterday, near a dozen head wearing the Hart brand." "That didn't happen," Alina said at once. "It happened," Cutter replied. "Question is whether it was poor management or plain theft." Silas kept his face calm. "Easy enough to settle. We ride the boundary, check the fence, and bring back whatever wandered. Cutter's eyes narrowed. You always this helpful. Only when men come dressed as trouble. The two riders behind Cutter shifted in their saddles. Alina felt the air change. Thin, sharp. Cutter smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Mr. Talbot's been patient with this place. Real patient. Most folks think a widow can't hold a spread this size much longer. Harsh winter coming, stock losses, barn fires, bad luck happens. The words hung there, not loud, not wild, just plain enough to be a threat. Alina's fingers tightened around the porch rail. Are you threatening me? Just observing frontier life. His gaze moved toward the cabin window. For half a second, Rosie's face showed there before she ducked away. And with a child around, Cutter added softly, well, dangerous country for little girls. Silas went cold all through. When he spoke, his voice dropped low enough that Cutter had to listen close. Men disappear in dangerous country too. Cutter's stare sharpened. Fall from a horse, ride into a ravine, get lost in a storm no one saw coming. Silas stepped nearer the gate. But you're here about cattle, that's all. For a long second nobody moved. Then Cutter gave a short laugh. Maybe it is. Tell Talbot we'll ride the boundary today, Silas said. If there are strays, we'll fetch them back. Cutter looked from him to Alina and back again. You look familiar. Silas did not blink. You're mistaken. Maybe. Cutter pulled his reins around, but I don't think so. The three of them rode off the way they had come, slow and easy, like men who believed they would be back. Only after they disappeared over the rise did Alina let out the breath she had been holding. Silas turned toward the house. Rosie was already at the door, eyes wide. Who were they? Nobody you need to fear right now, he said. Papa. He crouched and put both hands on her shoulders. Go help yourself to the last biscuit on the table. She hesitated, then nodded and went. Alina stood very still in the yard. He threatened her. Yes. He threatened all of us. Yes. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold, though the morning had already begun to warm. Talbots wanted this ranch for years. Daniel always said it was the water. Our creek runs clean even in August. Silas studied the direction the riders had gone. He'd been pressing since your husband died. Offers at first, polite ones, then cut fences, spooked cattle, missing tools, small things that could be called accidents. She swallowed. This is the first time he sent men to my door in daylight. Silas nodded once, because he thinks you're almost broken. Am I? He looked at her then, really looked. Her fear was real, so was her anger. No, he said, you're not. They rode the boundaries after noon. Rosie stayed close beside Alina on the gentlest mare. Silas found what he expected. The fence itself held, but there were tracks, fresh horse tracks. A small bunch of cattle had been driven over the line and then pushed back just far enough to leave confusion behind. Made to look careless, Alina said. Made to look weak, Silas corrected. She glanced over at him. You talk like you've seen men do this before. He did not answer right away. That evening, after Rosie was asleep with the silver dollar tucked under her pillow and the house had gone quiet, Alina found him at the table with a rag and the old Colt revolver he had pulled from his saddlebag. Moonlight touched the barrel. The sight of it made her stop. You never said you carried one. Haven't much lately. But you know how to use it. Silas set the cloth down. There was no point pretending anymore. I was a deputy once, in Kansas. Alina stayed where she was, a lawman. For years, he looked at the gun, not at her, long enough to make enemies. The room turned still except for the fire. What happened? She asked. His hand closed over the revolver. A man I put away got out, came looking for me when I wasn't home. Alina felt the answer before he spoke it. My wife was there with Rosie. His voice thinned, then steadied by force. She tried to stop him. Alina crossed the room without thinking. She stopped beside him, one hand resting on the back of the chair. "She died before I got there," he said. "I killed him after. Then I turned in my badge and left. Been drifting ever since." The fire snapped. Outside, wind brushed the side of the cabin. Alina lowered her hand over his. "You protected what you could," she said. His laugh was small and bitter. "Too late." No, her fingers tightened. Not too late for Rosie. That got him to look up. "And not too late for this place," she said quietly. "Not if you still mean to stay." Silas turned his hand beneath hers and held on. "This fight isn't yours," she murmured. His grip deepened. "Rosie smiles here. She sleeps through the night here. You brought her back to herself piece by piece." His eyes did not leave hers. "You think I'll walk away from that?" Alina's breath caught. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Rosie stirred in the next room and called out in sleep for her papa. The sound broke the spell, but not the feeling left behind. Silas stood. "I'll take the main room from now on." "What?" "If Talbot sends men at night, they come through me first." Alina wanted to argue. Instead, she only nodded. Later, from her bed, she could hear him settling his blankets by the fire. The house felt changed again, more fragile in one way, safer in another. In the next room, Rosie slept. In the main room, a man with an old badge in his bones kept watch. And Alina lay awake longer than she meant to, staring into the dark, thinking not of fear, but of the dangerous comfort of knowing she no longer wanted to face any of it alone. 3 days passed after Wade Cutter's visit. 3 long days of watchful quiet. No riders came. No fences were cut. No cattle wandered. The stillness felt wrong to Silas, the way a creek feels wrong when it goes too quiet before a flood. Dangerous men did not give up when a threat failed. They only changed shape. So he changed the family's habits. Rosie did not go anywhere alone. Not to the henhouse. Not to the pump. Not even to the barn cats without one of them close by. Alina asked no questions about the caution. She had seen enough already. Fear had settled into her now, but it no longer made her freeze. It made her careful. On the 4th morning, Silas said, "We're riding up into Red Hollow for the missing strays." "All of us?" Alina asked. "All of us." She understood at once. Leaving Rosie behind would be riskier than taking her. Rosie looked from one face to the other. "Am I helping?" "You are," Silas said. That was enough for her. They set out after breakfast beneath a clean blue sky. The air smelled of dry grass and distant snow. Rosie rode between them on her little mare, proud and straight-backed, one gloved hand tight on the reins. Alina had braided her hair that morning, and Silas felt a strange ache seeing the neat plaits bounce against Rosie's shoulders. She had begun to look less like a lost child and more like someone rooted. Red Hollow lay west of the ranch, where the land broke into rough stone and narrow draws. Juniper clung to the slopes. Red cliffs rose sharp and silent. It was beautiful country, but blind in too many places. A man could hide there all day and never be seen. "Stay close," Silas warned. "I will," Rosie said. They found the cattle near a spring in a pocket meadow, grazing as if the world held no trouble at all. A few bore the Hart brand, others carried Talbot's mark. Alina stared. "Well now." "Exactly," Silas said. "Someone mixed them on purpose. To make it look like theft if anyone came looking." They separated the herd slow and careful. Rosie proved useful again, pushing one nervous cow back into line before it could bolt. By noon they had the cattle sorted and were resting the horses near the spring. Alina unpacked biscuits and dried beef. Rosie sat cross-legged on a blanket and drank from the tin dipper, then looked up with bread crumbs at the corners of her mouth. "Tell me a story," she said. Silas smiled. "You ask that like it's an order." "It is." Alina laughed softly. "I can do one better. I'll tell you about when I was 10 and thought I could tame my father's meanest mule." Rosie leaned in at once. As Alina spoke, her face changed. Grief did not leave it, not fully, but memory warmed it. She told Rosie about flat Ohio fields, a stubborn mule named Bishop, and the foolish courage of little girls who believed they could charm bad temper out of anything with apples and prayer. "Did it work?" Rosie asked. For 6 whole minutes. Silas laughed and the sound startled him. The canyon walls caught the warmth of their voices and sent it back. For one easy stretch of time, the threats and fear felt far off. There was just the spring, the horses, the red stone, and the simple blessing of hearing a leaner tell a story to his child. Then Rosie pointed. Dust. Silas turned at once. A small cloud rose on the eastern edge of the hollow, riders, more than 2, coming fast. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "take Rosie and the cattle into that draw, stay low." "What about you?" "I'm going up for a better look." Rosie's face had gone pale. "Papa." "Do exactly what Mrs. Eleanor says." She nodded hard. Silas rode to higher ground and slipped his horse behind a shoulder of rock. From there he saw them clearly, not Talbot's men, neighbors. Tom Gentry in front, broad in the saddle and waving his hat. 4 others rode with him, all men Silas had seen in town or on the range. He let out a breath and rode down to meet them. Tom reined in. "Been looking for you." "What's happened?" "Talbot," Tom said flatly. "He strung barbed wire across Miller's Crossing in the night. Jim Wilkes' boy nearly killed his horse on it before dawn." Silas swore low. Open water crossings were common use around there. Everybody knew it. Talbot had not just made a claim. He had thrown down a challenge. Eleanor and Rosie emerged from the draw with the cattle. Rosie saw the extra riders and sat straighter, trying to look brave. Tom tipped his hat to Eleanor. "Ma'am." "What affects one ranch affects all," she said. "That's why we came." They made camp in the hollow that evening rather than risk driving cattle home in failing light. A small fire took hold beside the spring. The men ate beans from tin bowls and talked low. Rosie helped pass cups around, solemn as a church deacon. Rough men softened around her without seeming to notice it. "Your little girl works harder than some grown men," Tom told Silas. "She notices that too," Silas said. Rosie overheard and glowed. As darkness settled, the talk turned serious. "Talbot means to choke us," one man said. "Water first, grazing next, then he'll lean on the merchants and the bank." "He's been doing it one ranch at a time," Eleanor said. "Quiet enough that no one could prove much." Tom poked at the fire with a stick. "Then maybe proving it ain't the first step. Maybe standing together is." Silas looked around the fire. "That's exactly the first step. Talbot wins because folks face him alone. One widow here, one small outfit there, one family too tired to fight, but together." He paused. "Together he has a problem." The men listened. "We share water rights on paper where we can. Help with feed when one place gets squeezed. Buy supplies together. Back each other in town and on the range. Make it plain that pushing one of us means dealing with all of us." Tom nodded slowly. "Hard thing, getting men to act like neighbors when they've spent years acting like rivals." "Harder thing is burying what he takes," Eleanor said. Silence fell after that. Rosie had drifted to sleep with her head in Eleanor's lap. Eleanor stroked the child's braid while the firelight moved over her face. Silas watched them and felt the old ache return, the one made of gratitude and fear and wanting too much. After the others rolled into their blankets, Eleanor stayed awake beside him. "Could it work?" she asked softly. "What you said?" "Yes," he answered, "but Talbot won't wait kindly while we get organized." She looked down at Rosie. "Then we'd better move faster than he expects." The fire burned low. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called. Another answered from farther off. Silas stared past the last of the flames into the black mouth of the hollow. Talbot had made his move. Now the valley would have to decide what kind of people they meant to be before winter closed in and chose for them. The fire came 2 nights later. Silas woke to the smell before he heard the shouting. Smoke, thick and bitter. Wrong. He rolled from his blankets in the main room and was on his feet before the thought had finished forming. Eleanor. She was already up. Rosie stumbled into the doorway clutching her doll, her face white with fear. "Papa." "The barn," Eleanor said, and they all heard it then. Horses screaming, wood cracking, the terrible hungry roar of flames. "Stay with her," Silas told Rosie. Do not let go." He grabbed his rifle and ran into the yard. Orange light tore through the dark. The west side of the barn was fully ablaze, fire racing up dry boards and climbing into the loft. Sparks spun into the night like a storm of red insects. The horses inside slammed against their stalls in panic. "The horses first," Elinor shouted. She was already at the pump, hauling water, though they both knew buckets would never beat a fire this size. Silas threw open the barn doors and plunged into the smoke. Heat hit him like a fist. He coughed, half blind and worked by sound and memory. One stall, then another. Horses burst past him, wild-eyed and slick with fear. He counted as they ran. 1, 2, 3. Then he saw the last mare in the far stall, trembling so hard she could barely stand. Rosie's mare. He snatched up a blanket, tossed it over the animal's head, and cut the tie rope with his knife. The mare fought once, then let him drag her through the smoke and out into the yard. Rosie cried out when she saw her. "Buttercup." "She's safe," Silas barked. "Take her to the fence." Rosie reached for the lead rope with shaking hands. Elinor caught the child's shoulder and guided her back. By then the corral had broken. The frightened cattle surged through one split section of fence and poured into the yard in a blind rush. Silas barely had time to pull Elinor clear before a horned steer thundered past where she had been standing. Together they swung wide and drove the panicked animals away from the house, shouting, waving, doing anything to keep the whole place from turning into one great stampede of flame and flesh. It was hopeless. The barn roof gave way with a groan so deep it felt like the land itself had spoken. Fire shot up high. Embers rained down. They had saved the horses. They had saved the house. The barn was gone. By dawn, only black ribs of timber remained. Smoke drifted low over the yard. The feed was lost. Tack ruined. Tools buried under ash. Cattle had scattered in every direction. Rosie stood beside Elinor with tears drying on her cheeks, her rag doll tucked under one arm and her free hand wrapped so tightly in Elinor's fingers that both knuckles had gone pale. "My kittens," she whispered. Elinor knelt and pulled her close. "I know, sweetheart, I know." Silas walked the edge of the ruins while the sky turned gray, looking for signs. He found them soon enough. Hoofprints in the soft earth beyond the barn. A charred torch stick tossed into the weeds. Not lightning, not chance, men. When he returned, Elinor saw the answer in his face before he spoke. "Talbot." Silas held up the burned stick, her mouth thin to a hard line. "Then he means to break us before the first snow. He means to try." By midday the neighbors began to arrive. Smoke had carried the news across the valley. Tom Gentry came first with his 2 sons and a wagon full of tools. Others followed behind him, men with lumber, women with pots of stew and coffee. Boys on horseback ready to help gather the scattered cattle. No one waited to be asked. Tom stood in the yard and took in the ruin. "That's it," he said. "No more pretending this is bad luck." One by one the others agreed. "We'll help raise a new barn. I've got extra hay. My boys can ride east and bring back any stock that broke off that way." Elinor looked from face to face, stunned past speech. Tears filled her eyes then, but she did not let them fall. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. An older ranch woman stepped forward and set a warm hand on Elinor's arm. "You thank us by still being here next spring." That night the yard filled with bedrolls and wagons. Men took watch in shifts with rifles across their knees. Women fed whoever came near the fire. The place no longer looked like one widow's failing ranch. It looked like a line being drawn. After Rosie fell asleep wrapped in quilts on Elinor's bed, Silas stood outside the house and stared at the burned outline of the barn. Elinor joined him, shawl tight around her shoulders. "They came because of you too," she said quietly. He shook his head. "They came because Talbot went too far." "No," she turned toward him. "They came because someone finally spoke aloud what everyone else was afraid to say, that he can be fought." Silas looked out over the camp of neighbors, the watch fires, the horses tied in rows, the black wreckage of what had been standing yesterday. "We're not through yet." "I know," Her voice softened. "But we're not alone now either." From inside the house came a sleepy voice. "Papa." Silas went in at once. Rosie was sitting up in bed, hair mussed, eyes swollen from crying. "Are the bad men coming back?" He sat beside her and drew her into his arms. "Maybe." She pressed her face to his chest. "Will you still stop them?" He looked over her head to Alina, who stood in the doorway with lamplight behind her. The room felt small and warm and fragile. Outside, the valley had begun to gather around them like a shield. "Yes," he said. And this time, for the first time since he had knocked on Alina Hart's door in the cold, he knew he would not be standing alone when the next fight came. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.